Why is everything getting hacked these days? It seems like there's a new hack or breach every single day. The recent one was Versal. That's like a software as a service hosting thing. Also the Axios. That's a package that a lot of developers use in their applications. And those got a lot of coverage, but it seems like even still, every year, there's more and more than previously announced. And that is probably true for a few reasons, more that you're just hearing about naturally, and it's actually happening more often. There's some studies show that it truly is happening more often. It's not like it just seems like it. And I would say there's a few main reasons behind it. I think at the core of everything, the biggest factor is companies don't seem to really get punished enough when there's a massive, really absurd data breach that they just were not securing customer data at all, and then they get like a slap on the wrist. And it's sure embarrassing for them. They might change things after the fact, but it's like, all right, well, if this mattered so much to you, you could see these faults in your processes. Why didn't you just fix it at the time? In fact, one reason that we're hearing about more hacks recently is because ever since only about 2024, the SEC requires that publicly traded companies notify them and notify customers when there is a data breach within 4 days, I believe it is. Whereas before, they didn't even have to necessarily tell anyone. So yes, part of the reasons we hear about more hacks is companies are actually required now to actually admit that they were hacked. Whereas before, they could just kind of sweep it under the rug and just hope that customer data didn't leak out publicly and prove that they were hacked. Now, that SEC rule only applies to publicly traded companies, but private companies are on the hook for things as well. There's a lot of individual state laws that require companies to notify of a breach if they, for example, have customers in that state. They have to do that. So a lot of notifications about breaches come from that, even if it's a private company. Also, GDPR, that's in Europe, they have notification laws. So European companies too. And then there's also other specific cases like for medical HIPAA type things or critical infrastructure, those companies, even if private, have to report. But of course, that all assumes that the companies are even aware that they were breached in the first place. I mean, some of these companies have such bad security probably that they don't even know that they got breached. It really would depend on the goal of the hacker. If it's to ransom them, then obviously the hackers are going to tell them, hey, we stole all this data, pay us. But if it was a secret operation to gather data without the company knowing, if possible, then they might never find out until years later. Or the hackers might try to keep access to the company's data internally for as long as possible. They might go months without being detected. Now, next, another major factor is that the strategy that hackers are using has been evolving. They've realized that a lot of times, you don't even have to focus on getting past the firewall by using your hackerman skills and finding open ports and stuff. You can literally just social engineer or target the individual developers or employees inside the company directly. You don't have to worry about going through the hardened infrastructure at all. For example, I believe that's how LastPass got hacked a few years ago. One of the senior developers, his Plex server, which was running on his own personal network, I guess it was open to the internet. He had a port forwarding to it, but he hadn't updated it in a long time, and it was vulnerable. And they were able to get into his network and then hack his devices and whatever, worm their way through, and eventually get access to the actual company stuff that he was working with. And the most recent Versal attack, that's a service that got a lot of coverage because a lot of companies use it. That was also hacked because an employee got compromised, and this was like a more convoluted one. So there was actually another company called Context.ai, unrelated to Versal, that they got hacked. And they, again, got hacked by a employee who was apparently looking for some kind of pirated games or something, and he got infected. That gave the hackers access to the Context.ai internal developer stuff. And it turns out a Versal employee actually wanted to go and use Context.ai for something, maybe a personal project. And when he went to log in with his Google account, you know how a lot of websites let you log in with Google? Well, it turns out the hackers changed Context.ai's sign-in flow to request way more permissions than they needed. So basically, when this Versal employee signed up for this other service, he granted his Google Workspace account all sorts of permissions to the hackers who compromised this other service. So then it was like double layer of just employees getting hacked, and then the other employee got hacked. They didn't even have to target the actual company itself. They were all internal. And then when the hackers were able to have access to their Google Workspace account, which had access to the Versal behind the scenes stuff, they were able to just dump it all. And I guess hackers have realized this is a pretty darn effective way to get into a company. And in this case, none of it was even targeted. They just had malware for some games, waited for someone who had any kind of authority at a company to download it and get infected, and then just spread that way. Though another way that you see companies getting infected through employees is outsourced companies. Like that's how Discord happened, where they hired some third-party company to handle the customer service, and it was the third-party company that got compromised. And because Discord provided a lot of customer data to this third-party company so they could handle the customer service, anything that they gave them was hacked, and that was a lot of user data. But sometimes these hackers don't even try to trick the employees, they'll just try to bribe them. I mean, think about it. If you have customer service employees who a lot of times they just outsource them to literal third world countries where they don't make a lot of money, they're not paid very well. And if a hacker comes along and says, hey, we'll pay you 100 times your salary if you just, maybe look the other way, or give us a little key that we can access just for a day or two, or give us this little information. It's not important, but if you can give it to us, we'll give you a whole boatload of money. There's a lot of people that would take that deal. So in general, some of the reasons have to do with the companies mostly probably focusing on outside insecurity and not really focusing on the internal stuff. They should really have zero trust authentication and all that at every stage, even internal. That's how Cloudflare, I believe, they were able to block a hack several years ago, because they require physical YubiKeys for all employees, where even if they do get tricked by other methods, then the hackers won't be able to actually do anything with it, or at least in that type of attack. So companies probably are going to have to start doing that, where it uses passkeys, physical attestation that you're actually there in person, touching whatever key, that sort of thing. And then, of course, there's the supply chain attacks, which, as far as I know, was kind of a rare thing a few years ago plus. But it seems like in the past few years, it's actually becoming a common thing. And supply chain attacks are where you have all this software that developers use that depend on other pieces of software. It's like a big tree. It's like that XKCD meme where a whole bunch of majorly used software is dependent on a whole bunch of other stuff, and all it takes is one weak link where hackers, in a lot of cases, will compromise a maintainer's account who has access to push out an update to some of this very critical but independently maintained software, and then everyone pulls from it thinking it's an update. And if they don't realize quick enough and it gets integrated into developer environments, a lot of times what happens is it's set up so as soon as you pull the update on your server or system, then it runs some kind of script that then infects you and steals all your stuff before you even know what happened. And this can happen with really any so-called package manager. So common ones you may have heard of is npm, pip, or pypy with Python, NuGet for C#. Basically, these are all big giant databases where you can say, well, I need to use this specific tool or whatever in my code, so I'll install it from this thing. And if you mistype it, that's one thing. Hackers will do typo squatting for a name that is similar to a popular one, and if you install the wrong one, you just download a malware. And of course, the other one is like what I just said, where the actual maintainer will get hacked and they'll push malware directly to the real thing. So ironically, these days, sometimes the old advice of keep your stuff immediately up to date, install the updates as soon as they're there, when it comes to developers pulling in dependency updates, that's not always necessarily the case. Of course, you want to install patches for newly discovered 0 days and stuff, but then you also kind of maybe want to consider delaying it like a day or two. So if it's a supply chain attack, other people will figure it out and they'll take the hit instead of you. It's actually kind of insane. So that's why actually I think with vibe coding, yes, it's great that people are getting into coding, but I don't think people are really understanding what they're doing. I see so many projects that depend on like JavaScript, Node.js, and Python and stuff that it heavily uses these package managers. And it's really concerning because a lot of times these AIs will just import a million different packages, every bloated thing, instead of just writing a little bit of code that does it independently. So it's like an exponential expansion of these dependencies. There's even cases of AIs hallucinating dependencies that don't exist, and hackers realize, this AI seems to be suggesting this package a lot to a lot of people that doesn't exist. We're just gonna register it ourselves and make it malware. So then anytime in the future, it's just gonna cause infections. It's actually kind of insane. So as for the question, are hacks actually becoming more common? Yes, I think they are for a lot of reasons. A lot of it comes down to hackers finding that companies are very slow to adapt, or they're not even incentivized to have proper security. And then it's like a double-edged sword of consumers kind of messing around with developer tools that they don't fully understand, or even, developers. And it just causes a lot of problems. I don't think there's really too much I need to explain about it. I would be curious though, if you guys maybe treat security differently than you did a few years ago. With vibe coding, are you more suspicious of brand new software? Do you think about whether or not you want to actually download stuff? Do you look into it more? That sort of thing. We can talk about that all down in the comments. I know I do. And next, I recommend my video where I talked about CPU-Z getting their website hacked, and for like a day there was a malicious version of the app getting downloaded. I'll put that link right there you can click on. And of course, if you want to subscribe, it should be worth it. If you enjoyed the video, of course, give it a thumbs up. It helps out in this day and age with AI slop with the algorithm. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.